Now I want to move to the somewhat more practical, near-term, relevant part of the talk about this whole idea of the metaverse, which stands here as a symbol of the virtual worlds we may in fact be creating in the coming decades. Because I think some of this philosophical analysis applies equally to the metaverse as to the Matrix. I mean, the metaverse got its start, as I said, in Neal Stephenson's novel Snow Crash in the early 90s, where the metaverse was in fact a single massive social virtual world that people entered into, spent time, hung out with people inside the metaverse. It was kind of like a more sophisticated version of Second Life experienced immersively through virtual reality. Second Life is still almost always experienced on a screen because it's proved very difficult to port to virtual reality, though there are other social worlds that people are developing, such as the corporation formerly known as Facebook, renamed a bit over a year ago to Meta, in honor of their ambitions of building a metaverse-style virtual world. These days, I think the term metaverse has changed its meaning a little from standing for a single virtual world to standing for something like a global interconnected system of virtual worlds, what's sometimes called the immersive internet. Like the internet, it's a whole system of sites online, but experienced immersively in 3D from the inside. And that's the idea that certainly the tech companies like Meta have tried to promulgate. That can be illustrated, that can be construed as a very dystopian picture. Here's the idea that the metaverse could be a descendant of Platos Cave. You know Platos Cave, where we're all prisoners sitting inside a cave, staring at shadows on the cave wall. You might think of the metaverse as a version of that. Here we all are, prisoners inside Mark Zuckerberg's cave, experiencing shadows on our VR consoles. That's a dystopian way of illustrating the metaverse. I guess I want to argue that, yes, certainly this could go in dystopian directions, but I want to argue for a somewhat more positive, at least metaphysical construal of what's going on inside the metaverse. I mean, the metaverse is not exactly the same as the Matrix. The Matrix is like this lifelong hypothesis. We've always been in the Matrix. The metaverse is just somewhere you go for a while and then you return. You know you're using VR. The epistemological question of are you using VR doesn't really arise most of the time. When you're using VR, you can, there's a headset, you can feel it. It's also far simpler for now than a universe simulation, although the metaverse worlds are going to get more and more sophisticated. But our key question, the question that arose for the Matrix, is the Matrix a world of illusions or is it real, also arises for the more realistic worlds of the metaverse. And I want to give it the same answer, that it needn't be a world of illusions. The idea that it's an illusion has been very popular, even among fans of VR. Here's William Gibson introducing the idea of cyberspace in Neuromancer in the 80s. And by cyberspace at the time, he meant something like VR. It's come to mean something more like the internet. But in Neuromancer, he meant something like the space of virtual reality. He said it's a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of people. So he claims it's a hallucination. Here's the film Ready Player One. In some ways, very VR positive. It's mostly set in VR, and virtual reality is in some ways more attractive than physical reality. And this film, still late in the film, you have a key character saying, reality is the only thing that's real, meaning physical reality is the only thing that's real. Virtual reality is not real. So still you get this ideology of VR as not quite real, some kind of illusion. That's what I want to combat. The standard view then, virtual objects are unreal, they're illusions, hallucinations, or fictions. My view, virtual objects are real, they're non-illusory digital objects existing typically on a computer somewhere, but no less real for that. If we're in a full-scale simulation like the Matrix, the objects we're interacting with are real digital objects running on a computer. Just think about, the Matrix the idea this is a simulation. All this is on a computer somewhere doesn't make it less real. Even in ordinary VR, the objects we're interacting with are real digital objects running on a computer. Yeah, it turns out those cubes I'm slicing in Beat Saber are ultimately data structures. Why does that make them less real? If it turns out that this lectern, that we live in an it from bit world, and this lectern is made of bits, that doesn't make it less real. Again, being digital is not a way of being unreal. Here's one illustration of the idea with we've got a physical kitten, we've got a robot kitten, like made of physical stuff and the non-digital stuff in the physical world, maybe with backed by some digital processes, and a virtual kitten. I don't want to say that the robot kitten is not exactly a real kitten. We wouldn't say it's a real kitten. Real kitten is a word for certain members of certain biological species, but it's still a real object. It's an object with all kinds of causal powers. You wouldn't say exactly it's an illusion unless you misclassified it as a biological kitten, which you needn't do. Same for a virtual kitten. I want to say the virtual kitten is not a real kitten, but it's still a real object with causal powers. I want to say the virtual kitten is just as real as the robot kitten. Neither of them are biological kittens, but they're still real objects with real causal powers that can enter into reality. So you might think there's one question is, are virtual objects real? It's also a further question, is VR an illusion? You might think, well, we at least, even if those virtual objects are real, we're still undergoing an illusion because things seem to be out there in physical space where they're not. So we have the illusion that VR is going on in a physical world around us, when in fact it's going on in a digital world. I want to argue maybe novice users of VR experience objects as being in physical space around them, which is an illusion. But an expert user of VR needn't be undergoing this illusion. An expert user of VR will usually know instantly that they're in a virtual world, and they will basically experience the world around them as a virtual world. I call this the phenomenology of virtuality. An expert user of VR experiences the world as virtual. They have non-illusory perception of a virtual world. And I think this is quite important to thinking about how we experience the virtual worlds we're developing.
David Chalmers discusses the simulation hypothesis at Mindfest 2023. The organizer of Mindfest and the director of the Center for the Future Mind is Professor Susan Schneider.
If you enjoyed that clip, then the full podcast is out right now. You can click around here. Enjoy. Subscribe to Theories of Everything to get notified of upcoming podcasts, as there are new full-length podcasts every week on the topics of mathematics, physics, consciousness, free will, and AI.